Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to getting up to speed on the big issues shaping our world. Today, we are plunging right into something that, well, it really touches all of our futures. We're cutting through all that noise about climate and food systems. Specifically, we're focusing this deep dive on some fascinating research. It's a paper called Global Potential of Sustainable Single-Cell Protein Based on Variable Renewable Electricity.
Ooh.
Yeah, quite a title. But our mission is basically to unpack how this tiny organism, powered by green energy, could genuinely shake up our global food system and maybe help us hit some critical environmental targets. So get ready for some pretty surprising facts, and maybe a few aha moments might change how you think about your next meal.
It's definitely timely. We're facing a monumental challenge, aren't we? Our current food system, it's pushing several of these critical planetary boundaries, as they're called, right to the edge. And on top of that, our demand for protein, which is fundamental, is just growing and growing. This study really highlights the urgency.
Okay, so let's unpack that.
Yeah.
This study lays out a pretty alarming reality. Our planet's already shot past multiple planetary boundaries. These are like Earth's essential life support systems, right?
Ugh.
Biodiversity loss, nitrogen and phosphorus cycles all out of whack, land system change, freshwater stress, and of course, climate change. It's not a great report card.
No, it isn't. And what's really striking is the direct link this research makes. It shows our global food system isn't just, a contributor. It's actually the primary driver for four of those major issues: the biodiversity, the nutrient pollution, land use changes, fresh water. And it's a huge factor in climate change, too. Over a quarter of our total greenhouse gas emissions.
Over a quarter, wow.
Yeah. And here's the kicker. Protein production, especially livestock, is responsible for a massive chunk of those impacts. But it only gives us about 25% of the protein we actually consume globally. So there's a real imbalance there.
So this isn't just a sort of background problem, it's heading towards a crisis. The study flags that with population growth, rising incomes, demand for meat and dairy could jump 70%. 70% between 2010 and 2050. That's huge.
It is. And that kind of increase really threatens to push these planetary boundaries from sort of an increasing risk zone into high risk, or maybe even past a tipping point.
Point of no return, potentially.
Potentially. It's a very clear signal that we need big changes fast.
Right. So what about the usual solutions we hear about? Eating less meat, cutting food waste. Those are important, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely vital. We definitely need to pursue those. But this study makes a compelling case that, well, they're probably not enough on their own. Not enough to get us to a fully sustainable food system at the kind of scale we need, or realistically everywhere in the world by 2050.
Okay.
So that really hammers home the need for something truly innovative, something beyond just tweaking the edges of agriculture as we know it.
And that, I guess, is where this study gets really, really interesting. It introduces single-cell protein, or SCP. So SCP, break it down for us. It's basically microbes.
Exactly. Think of it as a protein-rich biomass. It's made from tiny microorganisms, could be specific types of algae, yeast, fungi, or bacteria. And these little guys are protein powerhouses, anywhere from 30% to maybe 80% protein content. Plus, you get edible lipids, carbs, micronutrients too.
Like microscopic protein factories.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
And the real magic, as you called it in the study's focus, is on a specific type: chemoautotrophic microorganisms.
Chemoautotrophic, okay.
Yeah, it sounds complex, but the key thing is, unlike plants needing sunlight, they can use CO2 directly from the air as their carbon source. And crucially, they get energy from chemical reactions, not light. That makes them incredibly efficient and versatile. Tiny chemical engineers, almost.
Okay, so they eat CO2 and chemicals, and the study calls it E-protein because of electricity.
Right, renewable electricity-based protein, the inputs are quite specific. You need hydrogen and oxygen made using renewable electricity, that's the electrolytic part. You need carbon dioxide, ideally pulled straight from the air, nitrogen too, and the whole thing is powered by optimally designed solar and wind farms working together hour by hour.
So you're basically making food from air, water, and green power.
In essence, yes, it's a manufacturing process for protein.
Now, you mentioned SCP isn't brand new.
That's right. It has some history. Germany actually produced yeast this way back in World War I, believe it or not, to supplement food. And in the 70s, there was a bacterial SCP called protein used for animal feed. Probably the most familiar example today is corn, right? That's fungus-based, been around since '85.
Okay, corn, right.
But the big hurdle, as the study really emphasizes, has always been finding cheap, sustainable food for these microbes, the growth substrates.
Ah, and that's what's changed now, the economics.
Exactly. That's the breakthrough. This study points to the dramatic fall in costs for renewable energy, solar PV, wind power just plummeted. Plus, the cost of water electrolyzers, the machines that make the green hydrogen and oxygen, that's coming down fast too.
Okay.
And then there's direct air capture, DAC, pulling CO2 from the atmosphere. That's becoming much more feasible, economically speaking.
Right.
So you put all that together, cheap green power, cheaper electrolyzers, affordable DA, and suddenly, this study argues, you've got the foundation for industrial-scale bacterial SCP plants.
Okay, so walk us through this power to SCP chain. How does it actually work?
Sure. So the study outlines it pretty clearly. You start with renewable electricity that powers your water electrolyzers, splitting water into hydrogen, H2, and oxygen, O2.
Uh-huh.
Then you capture CO2 from the air using DAC. You also need nitrogen, usually supplied as ammonia, which can actually be produced on-site using more green hydrogen.
Okay, got it. All generated there.
Mostly, yes. Then these gases, H2, O2, CO2, along with ammonia, water, and some minerals, are fed into large fermentation tanks. That's where the chemoautotrophic bacteria do their work.
They eat that mixture and multiply.
Exactly. They grow and reproduce, creating this microbial biomass. After the fermentation stage, you separate the cells out, pasteurize them for safety, and then dry them. The end product is this SCP powder. The study assumes about 95% dry matter, 5% moisture, and a really high protein content, around 65%.
Wow. It sounds very controlled, almost like making medicine.
It is quite controlled, and what's really neat is the resource efficiency the study describes. It's designed as a closed-loop system where possible.
How so?
Well, for example, the waste heat from the electrolyzers isn't just vented. It can be captured and reused, maybe for the DAC process, which needs heat.
Ah, smart.
Yeah, and even water evaporated during the drying stage can be partly recovered and reused. It really transforms food production into what the paper calls an energy system space.
So less farming, more manufacturing.
In a way, yes. Highly efficient manufacturing. And the model they use in the study is pretty sophisticated, too.
What kind of model?
It's described as a semi-flexible on-site power-to-SCP model. Basically, it's designed to handle the ups and downs of solar and wind power. It integrates different types of solar panels, wind turbines, and critically, includes energy storage batteries for short-term and large-scale hydrogen storage, like in underground pipes or salt caverns, for longer-term balancing.
So it can keep running smoothly even when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
That's the goal, to ensure stable, round-the-clock production in the most cost-effective way, despite relying on variable renewables.
Okay, this is leading to a really big idea from the study, isn't it? The idea of decoupling food production from traditional farming.
Precisely. That's a core takeaway. This technology potentially allows us to make protein without needing vast amounts of arable land or fresh water.
What does that mean for us, practically?
Well, huge implications. First, a massive reduction in freshwater use and land use. We're talking about two planetary boundaries under immense pressure right now.
Right.
Second, because it's a closed, controlled system, it frees food supply from weather patterns, from seasonality, from the impacts of climate change like droughts. It makes production much more resilient.
So more reliable food supply.
Potentially, yes. Plus, it maximizes how efficiently nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus are used, drastically cutting down on the pollution associated with fertilizer runoff. And you eliminate the need for herbicides, pesticides, all those agricultural chemicals.
And the climate impact.
If it's powered by genuinely sustainable electricity, the potential is there to significantly slash the greenhouse gas emissions of protein production.
The potential just seems enormous. For food security, for the environment.
It really does. Now, the study doesn't just talk potential. It gets into the hard numbers, the economics. It provides a detailed techno-economic assessment, specifically looking at the projected levelized cost of this E-protein, basically, the average cost over the lifetime of a plant.
Okay, let's hear the numbers. Where does it start and where could it go?
All right, so the projections in this study suggest that by 2028, in the best locations, think Patagonia, parts of Australia, the Atacama, Tibet, Horn of Africa, places with amazing renewables.
Lots of sun or wind.
Exactly. The cost could be around 5.5 to 6.1 euros per kilogram of protein.
Okay, 2028, and then?
By 2030, assuming the first full-scale plants are operational, costs are projected to drop to maybe 4.0 to 4.5 euros per kilogram. That drop is mainly thanks to economies of scale. Building bigger plants is just more efficient.
Makes sense. And long term, by 2050.
By 2050, the study project's costs could fall significantly further, down to maybe 2.1 to 2.3 euros per kilogram at the very best sites. And it could become widely available across most continents for around 2.3 to 2.5 euros per kilogram.
Wow, that's a huge decrease. What's driving that long-term reduction?
It's a combination of things, gradual cost reductions and efficiency gains in all the components. The
Uh,
solar panels, the wind turbines, the electrolyzers, the bioreactors, and also what they call learning rates. Basically, as we build more of these plants, we get better and cheaper at doing it.
the learning by doing.
Precisely. And the ambition here is quite significant. The study targets a production capacity of nearly 30 million tons of protein per year by 2050.
How much is that in the grand scheme of things?
It's about 10% of the projected global food protein demand for 2050 and nearly 2% of the feed protein demand, so a substantial slice of the pie.
Okay, so if costs are coming down, what are the biggest cost drivers right now? And where are these plants likely to be built? You mentioned the best spots.
Yeah, the study is very clear on this. The electricity supply is the single biggest cost factor. That
Hmm.
includes generating the renewable power and the technologies needed to balance its variability. It accounts for something like 37% to 49% of the total e-protein cost. So access to cheap, reliable, renewable power is absolutely paramount.
Which explains why those sunny and windy regions are key initially.
Exactly. The study maps this out quite nicely. By 2030, you see wind power being the dominant source in places like Patagonia, Northern Europe, the UK, whereas solar PV dominates the mix in the Western US, Mexico, Brazil, Southern Europe, basically all of Africa, the Middle East, Australia, large parts of Asia.
And solar becomes even more dominant by 2050.
That's the projection, yes.
Yeah.
The PV-dominated regions expand significantly.
Interesting.
And it's worth noting, the study points out that while the generation cost of, say, solar power might get incredibly low, maybe 8 to 10 euros per megawatt hour by 2050 in prime spots, the actual delivered cost of electricity to the ESCP plant will be a bit higher, maybe 12 to 14 euros per megawatt hour.
Why the difference?
Because you have to factor in the cost of those balancing technologies, the batteries, the hydrogen storage, maybe hydrogen-fueled turbines for backup. Managing the variability adds cost.
Okay, that makes sense. And inside the plant itself, where does all that electricity go?
The study breaks that down too. The biggest consumer by far is the water electrolyzer making the hydrogen that's about 54–56% of the power.
Okay.
The actual SCP core plant, the fermentation part, uses about 19–20%. Then you have things like electric heating for steam generation, maybe 11–13%, and chillers around 8%.
What about the direct air capture? Doesn't pulling CO2 from air use a lot of energy?
You'd think so, but according to the study's model, the DR system and its heat suppliers only account for about 3–4% of the total electricity use.
Well, really?
Mainly because they factor in using waste heat generated by other parts of the process, especially the electrolyzers. That clever heat integration makes a big difference to the DIC energy needs.
Very efficient design. Okay, so energy is the biggest cost, but what else factors in significantly?
Well, the capital cost of the ESCP core plant itself is significant, about 24–32% of the total levelized cost. Then there's the cost of the hydrogen supply system, including storage, that's around 9–15%, and the CO2 supply from DC comes in at 8–10%. The study estimates the cost of that captured CO2 at around 166 to 188 euros per ton.
And you mentioned hydrogen storage costs can vary.
Yes, particularly the storage aspect. If you're in a region where you have access to cheap, large-scale storage like underground salt caverns, that can significantly lower the cost of your hydrogen supply compared to relying solely on manufactured tanks or pipes. Geology plays a role.
Fascinating. Okay, putting it all together,
Yeah.
the scale, just how big could this get? What's the real global potential here?
The scalability demonstrated in the study is, frankly, enormous. Just as an example, they calculate that producing 100,000 tons of e-protein per year might require somewhere between, say, 1,800 and 400 megawatts of hybrid solar wind power.
That's a lot of power.
It is, but feasible with modern renewables deployment, and about 800 to 1,200 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity. These are industrial scale projects for sure.
And what about the land use for all those solar panels and wind turbines? Doesn't that become an issue?
That's a key point the study addresses. While the power plants themselves occupy a certain area, the effective land use is often much lower than the gross footprint. For solar farms, maybe 50% of the land area is covered by panels. For wind, it's much less. Maybe only 1–2% is physically occupied by the turbines and infrastructure. The land in between can often still be used for other things, like agriculture or grazing.
Okay, so it's more land efficient than it might first appear.
Yes. And here's a really powerful comparison from the study. To supply that target of 27 million tons of e-protein by 2050 would need about 10,800 square kilometers of land for the power generation. But now, consider this. Theoretically, if you wanted to meet 100% of the world's projected food and feed protein demand in 2050 using only E protein,
100%.
hypothetically, yes. The study estimates it could require just 0.54% of the Earth's total land area. 0.5%.
That is absolutely tiny compared to current agriculture.
Exactly. And crucially, that land doesn't need to be fertile, arable land. It could be arid regions, deserts, places unsuitable for conventional farming.
The implications are just staggering, so the theoretical potential is even bigger.
Oh, vastly bigger. The study estimates the global theoretical production potential in 2050 could be around 31 gigatons of E protein.
31 gigatons. That's astronomical.
It is. It's about 360 times the actual production target they set for 2070 in their reference scenario. It basically means we have almost unlimited flexibility in where we could potentially produce this stuff.
So most countries could potentially become self-sufficient.
That's the implication, yes. It could fundamentally shift global food trade, boost food security and sovereignty in regions currently dependent on imports, and slash food transportation emissions.
Incredible potential. Okay, let's bring it back to the market. How does this E protein actually compete with the proteins we use today? First, cost-wise, for human food.
Right, so the study compares the projected E protein costs we discussed with current prices for common plant-based protein isolates used in food products. Soy protein isolates, for instance, cost somewhere between 1.8 and 8.1 euros per kilogram of protein in recent years, 2019-2023. Pea protein isolates were maybe 3.5 to 9.3 euros per kilo, 2020-2023.
Okay, quite a range there.
Yeah, market prices fluctuate, but the study's conclusion is pretty striking. With E protein costs projected at 5.5, 6.0 euros per kilo by 2028, and then 4.0, 4.4 euros by 2030. It could actually start being cost competitive for food applications surprisingly early, maybe even within the next few years.
As early as 2028.
Wow, and certainly by 2050, when costs are projected down around 2.1, 2.3 euros per kilo, it becomes competitive with even the cheaper end of soy and pea isolates.
Okay, so viable for human food relatively soon. What about animal feed? That's a massive market, driven heavily by cost.
That's a tougher comparison currently. Soybean meal for feed is much cheaper, maybe 0.66 to 1.75 euros per kilogram of protein. So, based purely on today's price dynamics, the study suggests E protein probably wouldn't be competitive for large-scale animal feed use just yet. The price gap is too large.
But as you said, price isn't everything. What about those environmental advantages? How do they stack up side by side?
This is where E protein really shines, according to the study's analysis. They compared ESCP directly with soybean production on several key environmental metrics. Land use, ESCP is estimated to be 2 to 35 times lower.
2 to 35 times less land.
Okay. Water demand, over 200 times lower for ESCP. Just drastically less water needed.
It's incredible.
Energy demand. Now, this is interesting. ESCP actually has up to 100 times higher electricity generation demand.
Higher.
Yes, but, and this is the critical point, that energy is designed to come from renewables, whereas conventional agriculture's energy footprint is often fossil fuel-based indirectly.
Right, so it's green energy demand.
Exactly. And then for global warming potential, the overall climate impact, ESCP generally comes out lower than soybean, especially when powered by clean energy.
So massive advantages on land and water, potentially better on climate, but uses more energy, albeit green energy.
That's a good summary, which leads to a really important point the study raises.
Which is?
What happens if we start factoring in the true environmental costs of food production? Things like deforestation or putting a price on carbon emissions.
Like carbon taxes or stricter regulations.
Precisely. The study argues that policies like the EU's ban on products linked to deforestation or applying GHG emission costs across the board could dramatically boost E protein's competitiveness. Suddenly, those higher upfront costs might look much more attractive compared to traditional commodities with large hidden environmental price tags. This could make it competitive even for feed, especially if targeting emission reductions from livestock.
That could really change the game entirely. Okay, so looking ahead, where does this leave us? Are there ways to make E protein even cheaper or better?
The study suggests there are definitely pathways for further improvement. Things like better heat integration within the plants to capture and reuse even more waste heat. Also potentially boosting the productivity rates of the microorganisms themselves through bioengineering, or finding ways to use the hydrogen and CO2 even more efficiently.
So continued R&D?
Absolutely. And even factors like financing costs matter. The study notes that just reducing the weighted average cost of capital, the WACC, down to 5% could lower the final protein cost by about 15%. So stable, supportive investment environments help.
And what makes this particular study valuable, do you think?
A key strength highlighted is that it's not just theoretical modeling. It actually uses and, importantly, publicly discloses real techno-economic data sourced from a company that's actively developing this hydrogen oxidizing bacteria technology and has an operational pilot plant.
So it's grounded in actual engineering data.
Exactly. That provides a much more robust, credible roadmap for how costs might realistically evolve over time as the technology scales up. That's a significant contribution.
So wrapping up the big picture here.
The overarching vision presented in this study is that e-protein offers a powerful tool, a way to potentially decouple our food supply from the limits of arable land and fresh water. This could enhance global food sovereignty, help keep food affordable, and crucially, it takes significant pressure off our planet's remaining ecosystems by radically reducing the environmental footprint of feeding ourselves.
And there was one more intriguing point at the end about direct air capture.
Yes, a really interesting potential synergy. The study suggests that the demand for CO2 from these large-scale e-protein plants could actually create a vital early market for direct air capture technology.
So making protein helps scale up carbon removal tech.
Exactly. By providing a guaranteed customer for the captured CO2, it could help drive down the costs of D faster, accelerating its deployment not just for protein, but for broader climate mitigation goals later on, perhaps in the late 2030s. A win-win.
That's a fascinating angle. Okay, so what does this all mean for you listening right now? Well, today you've had a deep dive into a potential future, one where our basic need for protein might be met in a way that's sustainable, incredibly efficient, and maybe even helps heal the planet. It's a pretty radical vision.
It really is. And maybe a provocative thought to leave you with. Imagine a world where the very act of producing our food doesn't just sustain us, but actively contributes to solving climate change and spurs innovation in other critical green technologies. How would that fundamental shift reshape, well, everything? Global economics, geopolitics, maybe even our whole relationship with the natural world. Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. We hope you continue exploring these ideas now that you have a much deeper understanding of the global potential of sustainable single-cell protein based on variable renewable electricity. Thanks for diving deep with us today.